So what's up, Jim?
Nothing much, man. It's been a while. Like I think the last time we podcasted, what was like a year ago?
Probably more than that. More than that. So welcome. You're like the inaugural guest for the relaunching of the Looking Around the Corner podcast. So
When are you gonna get a virtual background? That's the real question.
yeah, I'm gonna have
Like
to figure
with
out
your
what I want to
logo.
get as the virtual background. For now, you can just see my blinds and this half a picture up here.
All good, man. Um,
Yeah, yeah. So I've been meaning to relaunch this thing for a while, this podcast, but life kind of happens, and this year has been a roller coaster for everyone, I think. But I'm glad before December 31st, I got it launched in 2020.
yeah, man. You gotta keep focused, right? So yeah, no, I guess you made a big shift, right, in your life the last year and a half,
Mm-hmm.
going from I guess, a professor at Emory to in radiology, practice as a radiologist there to moving up north. I'm curious about your journey. I feel like that would be cool to hear a bit of, and
Yeah, yeah. I
what
mean, my
you feel now versus then, and like what life is like, in this COVID world.
life, I think life for me for the last probably year and a half, 2 years, about a year and a half, it's one curveball after the other. That's the best way I can describe it. And I think and overall it's been in a positive direction. I mean, honestly, compared to a lot of other people's problems, mine are pretty trivial. Like I'm lucky, I have my health, my family, extended family, friends are good. So the the things that have affected a lot of other people, we've been lucky enough to, not have been affected by. So I
Yeah,
hope 2021 brings in even more stories where people are like, okay, they can now move on to other things in their life, as opposed to being, constantly on guard and scared about what's going to happen, so to speak. I mean, for me, yeah, I quit a job that I was at for a while, actually, many years, almost 8 years, and then we moved up here to the Northeast U.S. and then started a new job. And just as we were sort of getting, acclimated to that transition, all of a sudden, the COVID pandemic hit, and everything slowed down. As far as
hmm
the different sort of things and interests that I had. I mean, one of the biggest things that got affected was just not being able to travel anywhere.
yeah,
That made a huge difference. I used to travel pretty extensively before, and it's weird, like not having had gone to the airport now in so long, and not traveling. And um, I put a tweet up earlier today just as a joke, like the number of airline miles that I didn't earn this year were unbelievable.
yeah, totally. No,
It,
I remember we had a planned trip for Japan. My girlfriend was gonna
uh-huh.
present there, and I was really looking forward to like Japan, and like now it's a virtual conference. We're at home. We're like, oh man, we were gonna be in Japan right now, and I feel like everyone has that sense of like, why am I not where I should be? My family for Christmas is in Atlanta. I for a
Yeah.
long time every year visit them for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it's like weird just being away. And I feel like this sense of disconnect, but yes, connection we have to people over Zoom is quite odd. It's like I'm talking to my parents more than I ever have, but yet I feel more disconnected in the sense like I can't be there for important things. So it's kind of weird. So I hear you there, and
What do you?
it's
I'm curious because I haven't really attended many of these, but what do you think about these virtual conferences? Like, I don't know. Have you attended a few of these this year?
I've actually hosted a few. So one of the ones that
Oh,
we
okay.
did I was a part of Climate Voice, which was
Hmm.
a climate change group that was focused on getting new bills passed at states and various organizations by signing pledges from employees in a company, and put pressure on companies to then get like the Transportation Climate Initiative TCI bill in the
Mhm.
northeastern states, yeah, clean transportation everywhere. So we had this whole organization. We did a virtual conference. We had like 50 to 100 people, and what you find is they all go in breakout rooms, and you're like brainstorming about stuff, and it's like this weird nuance of like now networking is focused. What? And before it was like a room full of people. You'd go like get business
Yeah.
cards and network a room. And then I've done that. I mean, I was an engineer. I never was really outgoing, but you kind of get used to it. And now it's like you have to like network within like a breakout room and then like go to other breakout rooms and like try to like exchange messages. But it's weird because you have to talk over people, and it's almost like this weird notion of how do you network in this
It,
post-COVID world over breakout rooms. It's actually a different feeling, and I don't know. It's weird. At the same time, like you can dominate it. It's like whoever can dominate a conversation the most will probably have the highest ratings on a social network. So
oh my
I don't
God.
know. It's
So,
weird. I feel like
sounds crazy. I mean, I haven't,
yeah.
honestly, I've really not been interested in too many conferences because, virtual ones, because, one of the reasons I liked going to conferences was the networking. In person, you meet
Mhm,
interesting people, and then hopefully you can continue that conversation after the meeting's over.
mhm,
And actually, one of our biggest meetings in radiology, which is the RSNA annual congregation, it's huge. Every year it's in
mhm.
Chicago. It's like thousands and thousands of radiologists and vendors and everything. And it was like I used to go almost every year, and it was fun because you got to see old colleagues, people you trained with, you met
Yeah.
new people, and it almost ended up being like, for me, it was mainly for networking and frankly
Mhm.
catching up with old friends. And now this year is the first year I haven't gone in a long time, and because the whole thing's virtual, and the whole time I kept thinking, I'm like, this it completely misses the whole point of the conference for me to go virtual on this.
Yeah.
And I don't
But
know.
as you're presenting research, I guess it's like you're presenting a poster or research paper. I guess it doesn't matter that much, but it's weird.
Yeah,
I don't really know. Catching up with people virtually has been quite a weird journey, especially like with friends who might have parents that are like affected by COVID or are
hmm
going through tough times. It's like super weird, like hearing like these acute, crazy stories that happen and not being there. Or for me, it's
yeah,
like kind of that too. It's like the other flip side of it is, what do you do when things get tough? Probably the rate of mental health issues is way high and already stress. Like when things happen, like where's the support? And I don't know, maybe we're better off supporting each other in a virtual world, or maybe not. I really don't know. I actually think people care more now when things happen than before. Uh, it's kind of like more people like check in or wonder just because, oh, did your parents have COVID? Like it's on
yeah,
everybody's mind. But it's like kind of weird. So yeah, I don't know. I feel very, very weird about networking generally, just catching up with friends. The format of it is very different. I feel like we're becoming closer to fewer people generally in
yeah.
our circles.
It's interesting you say that, like the whole check-in thing. You like, I noticed that with my own parents, and like every few days I'll just, if nothing, just be like, hey, everything okay? Everything
Mm-hmm.
okay? How are you guys feeling? And it is odd because I never did that really before COVID. Like it was more like I talked to them once a week. Okay, what's going on? Just very. It wasn't a check-in. It was just like it was a routine. It was like, okay, well, we
Yeah.
talk like once a week, and et cetera. And now it's like, because you know that this virus is out there, and that at least even right now, there's no actual protection against it other than at least mitigating factors or whatever. It's like every time you keep thinking, you're like, wait, I haven't heard from them in a little while.
Well, my
I
girlfriend
hope
got the
everything's
vaccine
okay.
today, so I feel like I've seen a glimpse of vaccination. She got the first
Yeah, yeah.
dose,
No, I mean,
so
it's an
but
awesome. I mean, it's a huge triumph for science and in technology that we're able that this has been rolled out in 2020. Like everybody said that these vaccines would not come out until sometime in 2021, earliest and whatnot. And so yeah, I mean, I think the surveillance is going to be very important, as to the safety of these vaccines now that they came out. And I think we're going to learn a lot in the next few weeks now that so many individuals are getting these, en masse. And I think there's even one of these dashboard, websites now that talks
Mm.
about vaccinations. And it was an interesting graphic I saw today from there. The entire map of the world was gray, and only England was blue. It said the person who commented said, "Oh, this is This is beautiful. I just want to see more blue everywhere." And
Yeah,
it was very refreshing to not see like red and
yeah.
with all the ghastly numbers of people getting sick and dying and
It's
in
it's
hospitals.
um it's weird. I feel like there's a lot of counterintuitive measures I'm sure that would work if we thought through organizationally cities and how they're planned and how we interact and transact within a city. It's amazing to me that Uber Eats is like available. I want to be able to get food without it, or Whole Foods and Amazon Prime. Like it's like the notion of going to a store induces fear in me. Like now, it's like I just don't feel like I want to go outside ever, and this feeling of like clicking a button and getting what you want has become like uh 5x in demand for me because
Yeah.
I don't know, it's weird. And then the whole idea of the stock market and all the companies that have 300x due to COVID, like voice companies, Zoom, we're on Zoom,
Yep.
Eric Yuan's company, all these technologies enabling society are now becoming the basis by which we work and do work. And it's just, to me, that's like a very, very deep thing for us as a society. And I've thought a lot about that just the past month. It's like what is the future going to be? And what do these technologies mean? Like, what do we want to build? What do we want
Yeah.
to push back on? Like what does it mean for us if everything is in your house and you're like looking into a camera and like
Do, do
doing
you
work?
do you think do you
Not saying
think like
everybody has that job,
yeah.
but I sure do right now. So
Well, it's an interesting question, right? Like when things go back to, I guess, the new normal, like meaning, vaccinations are relatively ubiquitous, or hopefully people actually get vaccinated. But let's presume that a good number of people get vaccinated. We're able to come out of this, COVID winter, so to speak, and now people feel better about, leaving their house and leaving their area and whatnot. How much do you think these new habits that we formed, like staying at home and ordering in and using video conference, all this new COVID normal, how much of it do you think we're still gonna keep post COVID, considering that inherently humans are social animals, you know?
I think it's
Trying
here
to
to
get
stay. I
along.
mean, time will tell what HR does at big companies.
Hmm.
Uh, Google announced this, I think just today, that they're going to do work from home policies at least 2 days out of the week permanently for
Hmm.
people, which is already a shift that nobody would have thought 5 years ago would happen. We started our company, Neuralx, was 100% distributed before all of this. So I think I was ready for it. But I think everyone's feeling the pain of being distributed, the burnout that happens, the overworking, the pressure to deliver without guidance. Not everyone functions well without structure.
Yeah, it's
It's
not for
a
everyone.
and I think that if you look at the distribution, there's probably 80-20, 80% people can't and 20% can, and the people who can are just going to be like super performers. And that's why it can't be either or. I think it's going to be a mixture
Hmm.
because post COVID, there's going to be a mixture. Some people are going to want to be more productive at home. There's never a binary decision, or there's always a grayness to everything in a society. But I think that I prefer for sure to work from home and be distributed and remote and motivate and build teams that way because it's cheaper, it's faster, it's more efficient, and also you ultimately have more time in a day. Like you wake up and do your work and you have hours left, and I can do Peloton for 1 hour, right? That's like I didn't do that before. If you commute for an hour or two from Atlanta to your house, so
Oh, yeah, the commute can
I don't
get
know.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. So
Do
that
you
adds
think?
up over years, right? Like think about all the time that adds
Yep.
up over 2 or 3 years and where that can go. and how you devote your time. And
When let's see, when we lived in Atlanta, yeah, it was about an hour and 15 minutes each way, 5 days a week, and it takes a toll on you. You know, you you do stuff during the time, you listen to podcasts and audiobooks and all that. But after a while, you're just like, it doesn't do it for you. After a while, you're just like, this can't be the way things should be in my life for
yeah,
forever. And it just it sometimes it's just it becomes the last straw type of thing, where you tolerate it, for so long, and then after a while, that same thing that you tolerated now becomes the reason you're just fed up with, like, your job or your whatever situation it may be. And so having the option of just, maybe even a few days a week working from home, I think it's sort of, it helps release that pressure cooker feeling of having to constantly be driving. And you're right, it's a different dynamic. You get your work done, or if you have something to do in the middle of the day, something that needs your attention that you couldn't do when you had a typical job where you had to be physically present all the time, and you had, someone maybe looking over your work or whatnot. I think it's not for everyone, but I think the hybrid thing that you're talking about, it would be very smart for companies to adopt, to the extent that they can adopt it.
I think optionality is good in every scenario for people in work, because
Mm-hmm.
the more options you have, the more likely you are to tune your environment to what you need. If you have children, or you just adopted a puppy, or you have family that's sick, like, and who knows what people are going through. And I feel like oftentimes work assumes the healthy individual with no family members to generate output in an economy. And in today's world, that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's not like a factory that you can just put assembly line workers in and expect performance and service jobs, which I think historically we've done. If you look at Google, Facebook, and all the big companies, they I think believe they've created an assembly line for outputting products.
Mm-hmm.
And that balance is kind of tipping a little bit. I think people are feeling a little burnt out. They're feeling like they're overworked. I just had my friend Alex today message me and say, my managers are really pushing me hard with artificial deadlines. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say what company he works at or who he is, but just for his privacy. But I'm just saying that, like, the tech companies, they really push you and
Well,
trying
and
to push you faster and faster.
it's not just tech companies, right? It's this industrial era mentality. It's still pretty pervasive in a lot of different industries, even, past the typical assembly line, worker, sort of inhabited industries. And it still happens. I mean, we see it in medicine a lot. I mean, it's becoming even more and more that work product is, that metric, and see this many
Mm-hmm.
patients in this much time. And so everything is, it's funny, like, they put it under the rubric of standardization. Like, oh, we're going to standardize, we're
Yeah.
going to standardize, we're going to. And sometimes what happens is that you over standardize things, and that over
Yeah.
standardization, it's almost like it's the same mentality they had. Like, they're saying that, okay, we want to make these nuts and these bolts in this factory, so everything has to be done this way, so we have this quality, and we're getting, x amount of nuts and bolts out per unit time, whatever. And so they've taken that system, and they've pretty much translated it into so many different industries at this point. And tech and
Yeah.
healthcare, and it's all, farm. I have a friend who's a pharmacist, and she says the same thing. She's like, oh yeah, her employer, they push the same type of mentality to them. So when, the patients come, and they ask her questions, she literally has to think, okay, I need to answer this question within the next 30 seconds, or I need to
Mm-hmm.
figure out a way to get this person away. Which is, she doesn't want to do that. She wants to be able to talk to the patients, to advise
Yeah.
them on
No,
the
it's
medicine.
it's I always think there's a pressure to produce what is expected and what is needed. There's often a gap.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's the way things are done now and the way things should be done, and there's always inequality. There's always a notion of some people in a utilitarian sense are going to benefit, and some people will be harmed by any decision we make in society. And the higher up it's made, the more impact it has to harm or help people.
Yeah.
So I always think, yeah, like the decision not to do what is expected to perhaps change people's mindsets or mentalities on what's possible is often actually a good thing in some sense. Like people in the climate movement deciding, hey, I'm not going to work for a company that is emitting carbon, and I'm going to either quit my job or pressure my company to sign a bill is an example of that. There's always a way that you can act to say, hey, like I like my job, but I don't necessarily agree with some of the ethics and business practices that my employer has. And there's a global issue there. It's not just a company issue, it's an international issue of climate change. It's like a thing that will affect people thousands of years from now. And so I think this is often a pressure, that people feel. And I don't think everyone always thinks in those timescales. It's like but I do think people have those values, and they're starting to feel these values either at a personal level within my lifetime. I want to see change in medicine, probably lifetime thinking, and I want to see like it become better and more egalitarian and more freedom and more ability to innovate. I've heard this from you multiple times. It's like, it'd be nice to be able to innovate within medicine and not have a tension between being a physician and innovating. Like, absolutely. Why is the culture such that it calls any other idea outside of maybe publishing a clinical research paper that is outcomes research related and radiology, maybe making incremental improvement? Why is that like the norm? And why not think like at a basic level, why is radiology, and maybe creating a new subspecialty like neuroradiology back in the day, like when they thought about that should be the norm, is thinking about new specialties, new things, and new areas to innovate. Applying what you have in space is really cool. Like you've talked to me before about like, yeah, how does the brain change in space like over 2 years? And how do you study that? How do you make it optimal in performance in space if microgravity is around and fluid dynamics changes over prolonged periods of time? Like, those are really interesting questions. Like,
it is.
I bet you the physicians of the future will have to have space in their curriculum at some point. Like, when did that happen?
That'd be
like,
awesome.
That's a real question. Yeah. Like, what point has it become so important that it becomes part of the med school curriculum? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, your points are great, because I think, the more I think about it, it almost seems like the drive for specialization and, to become a subject matter expert on a particular thing, that you kind of go down this rabbit hole in certain industries, especially like in medicine and stuff like that, where, there's a incentive to go ahead and become like the expert on this one very narrow area, as opposed to, as opposed to, I think sometimes what like venture capitalists may do, where they tend to see a lot of different things come through the pipeline to say, here's a problem in this space or in this industry or this, and it's very interesting notion, because the same thing that got people to become super specialized in whatever their area of expertise is also the thing that ends up cornering them. So now all of a sudden you spend all this time and effort and energy and resources to get to this one position. So like, say my example, like a neuroradiologist, it's very hard for a person that does all that level of specialization and kind of cones down to like one particular thing, to all of a sudden say, okay, I'm gonna now just pivot and do something very much unrelated to what all my training was, or and whatnot. It's just not a natural way of thinking for most people, because they say, well, I did all this work to get to this point, and now I'm going to just make a 90-degree turn and then go and try to innovate or do something different.
To me, that's natural. I know for most people it's not. I feel like
you're one.
It's I
this
feel
is
like
why I like talking to you, because because it's natural to you. You're like one of the few people that I know that is a natural way of thinking. I wish more people thought that way. Honestly, I wish I thought more like you did, where you're like, okay, this is the next challenge. Okay, let's solve this problem, let's solve that problem. And you're not pigeonholed by the sunk cost of saying, well, I did all this to get here, so therefore I should just keep going.
Well, I do feel some of that though. So I think one of the biggest things that you don't control and you choose a life path that is not subspecialized is there's more risk in human trust with others, right? When you build a company and you have 4 years of commitment, you base your growth off of the teams that you build. There's more risk in relationships causing issues in your trajectory, at the founder level or wherever else. Whereas in this system like healthcare, there's a lot of people you don't agree with, you hate, and you go through the system, but you're still having a medical degree and you could practice anywhere with license. So I think this is more of the risk, it's around people and trust, and you kind of have to figure out how to navigate that whole networking scene you're mentioning in a way that channels output that somehow sustains your life, whether it through a startup or philanthropists or others. That creates a lot of constraints that make you creative. You have a lot of creative ideas. And how do I take 5 people with no money and get to 300K revenue in 2 years? One of the challenges and frames of mind I had was how to build a research lab with $5,000 over 2 years. How do I build an academic lab with that constraint? And I came to a really creative solution. We partnered with UW. We had a resident at the time, physician. He was funded. He had a grant. He did a fellowship, and he used all of his research time to do our research mostly. And at the same time, we funded a few IRBs ourselves with the money. And then we had a competition model that funded all these fellows, like 40 fellows over the years, to do demo projects in our lab through competitions. And it yielded 5 or 6 research papers, a lot of impact. And I feel like that's an example of a constraint that's artificial that is cool. And, it ended up having a voice computing textbook and all these things, like channeling new people to train in our lab and be employable by our company.
Can you just for the sake of, I mean, I know your background in history, but for the sake of, those listening and watching, can you just briefly go over, what you did as a company and your role and what problem you solved and sort of, and you had an exit from the company. So I think everybody would love to hear about that,
Yeah, so I think the journey, my life has been very circuitous. I was born in LA. I've moved all throughout my life. I grew up, I would say, mostly in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, then Atlanta, Georgia. I moved to Georgia Tech and for my undergrad, was a bioengineer by training. I did a lot of research in engineering and neuroscience. Huge passion of mine. Halfway through college, my brother had a psychotic episode, very, very traumatic for me in my family. And you can imagine going to the psych ward and seeing someone you've known be fully functional your whole life have a psychotic episode. And that changed my motivation. It was like, at that moment, I was like, wow, do I want to be a physician? When a lot of physicians I was talking to with my brother really didn't help him or get him better. And I wondered why, and you look at the mechanism of schizophrenia, you look at all the researchers doing this work and they're throwing drugs at it without imaging a brain and tuning drugs and doing a lot of the stuff that you probably do for patients. It's not really done for a lot of psych patients like him. So I think this was really fascinating to me. For a number of years, I was like, how do I solve that problem of treating schizophrenia, diagnosing it early? So I was always fascinated with that. So out of school, I started actually a fund focused in neuroscience. I thought one of the best ways to innovate was to fund startups and not necessarily go to grad school or do other things. At the time, it was around 2013 when the BRAIN Initiative was being pioneered by President Obama, and a lot of research funding. I think it was almost $1 billion of BRAIN research funding.
Yeah,
but there are only 30 companies on Angel's list that were neuroscience affiliated. So we were wondering, why are there no startups when $1 billion is going into pumped research?
Yeah.
And so we thought there has to be a way to translate this work and create a culture where instead of doing research and then getting more research funding, you get more research funding, get more validation, and then maybe get a licensed out of a university 5 to 10 years later, from the get-go, you think, how can I build a company and translate it with a physician right next to you? And so we built this incubator called Neuralunch. It was an accelerator fund, funded 11 companies. It was one of the largest neuroscience research communities in the world. Did a similar thing in cybersecurity and machine learning right after that, because the model is working pretty well, and our fastest growing company for machine learning. And this was done with Chris Klaus in Atlanta, who's well known in internet security, and in the neuro side, Jordan Amadio, who's a neurosurgeon at the time,
Jordan,
which you might know Jordan. So I wasn't the only one here, as we had a great team. So I kind of had this weird engineering background with investment experience, still had this passion for schizophrenia. I mean, my brother is treatment-resistant schizophrenic over the years, so I've always had an interest. And so I really wanted to actually spin something out and operate a company. And so we founded Neuralx, which is a company focused to use voice to screen for psychiatric disease, because I saw a lot of research papers that showed voice was really a good marker for early stage schizophrenia diagnosis. You could take a voice sample, like, how's your day? And then just from that, you could actually predict who would or would not have a psychotic episode with very high accuracy and at-risk youth. And so I read this paper in MPJ Schizophrenia. It was published by a very humble Argentinian scientist, Guillermo Cecchi, out of IBM research team, ARM. And he's based out of Rockefeller University. I flew up to New York, met with him. I always have the mindset, if you start a company, talk to the 3 best people in the world on that topic before you decide to start a company, to make sure your idea is actually good.
It's good advice.
It could be bad. So I just want to throw that out there, anyone. So I met with him. I met with many others, John Pestian at the UC Cincinnati Children's, who's a world leader in the space in two-side detection and voice analysis, as well as Jan Van Santen at OHSU and Max Little at MIT Media Lab. Got a really good feeling that, there's a huge opportunity to use voice to use it as a biomarker, as a vital sign of sorts in healthcare. And lots of great research. So I was this crazy engineer out of a fund, started a company, recruited a team. I had many people I've worked with over the years, and built it. And started out with just this idea. Over the years, we found that the place that we wanted to focus was building a survey product called Surveillex, where you could create and distribute voice surveys in less than a minute. The reason why we decided to go that route is that all the research that we did internally in our labs to do voice biomarker research took a year. They use something called RedCap, which is a survey system. You have to import an audio file from a phone. It was so painful to do this research to get an audio file uploaded.
I've used that
in the
before.
Cloud. So anyone who's used RedCap knows RedCap sucks. So it's no offense to RedCap. It's free, but it's just not something people like to use. So we built basically a RedCap for voice surveys to do this research really well, and it was kind of like SurveyMonkey for voice surveys. And we created probably the one of the biggest products in the world in that topic as a web browser tool to collect voice data and labels. Scaled that to about 500,000 voice sessions and 50,000 users. And then got acquired recently by Son Health here in Boston, which was based out of PureTech, which is a big biotechnology company that basically spins out pharma companies or digital health companies and then exits, kind of taking majority share. So lots of lessons learned in that process, from building teams, building a lab from scratch. I like to say we're a startup that spun into academia, not a startup that spun out of academia, which is very different.
Yeah, that is very different.
We also published a textbook in voice computing. We had a very broad vision that could iterate. If we didn't go in healthcare, we would have gone as a survey company. We had a lot of things that we could have continued to grow. Mostly sold because I felt like it was just the right time. There were lots of people entering this vocal biomarker space. It was super hyped. And I just felt like it was I was a little stressed out. My team was small. I was maybe 1 to 2 people full-time over the last 2 to 3 years, and the rest part-time. Kept the burn rate low, but we were profitable, could have kept going. It's just at some point you're just I just want to, I also felt like I wasn't learning as much as I'd like to learn. And having a bigger team, it can move and execute faster. So Son and us, we're really aligned at a mission level, which is really awesome. And I've known Jim, the COO and founder of that company, for so many years. We're always at the conference circuits, and we're hey, we're always talking about like strategies and the next step in voice, and we're always on the same panels. Sure, you guys are out there. You always see the same people in the same panels.
Yeah,
I'm finally at the
it's like
same
a
point where
circuit, you know.
you kind of learn a lot when you merge, and you kind of get this idea like, well, yeah, you can execute faster. It's always weird going through an acquisition, but it's it's just there's a lot to decouple there, from integration of products to team. I can't speak about all the terms of it, but doing all the M&A stuff myself personally with a law firm is another story entirely. Most people have a whole arsenal of M&A lawyers and
Yeah.
everything else, but I did it very, very efficiently. Um, so lesson learned, like with all that, startups are hard, but definitely worthwhile, and it continues to be a startup. It's not just has a little more stability. So.
Nice. No, congratulations on that. It's I'm sure it's bittersweet, right? Where you grew, your baby, so to speak, this, your company, and now it's acquired, by this other company or whatnot. And yeah, how much of the new essence of Neuralx is still there, as opposed to now that things are merging and whatnot. How much do you envision you having input into this next phase versus saying, okay, you know what, guys, I did everything I wanted to do, I could do. I think I'm going to move on to something different. Like, when do you, as a founder, as a CEO, when do you make
So,
that decision
so,
to
so I
say,
think
I'm
I
moving
think
on?
that it's hard for me to answer all these things because I'm under like a lot of uh, I guess some agreements. But I
Yeah,
can't say
yeah.
that I can't speak to San too much, but I can say that this notion of going through this process um, is incredibly different. It changes your motivational set. It resets your mindset of like, oh, like, okay, what do I want to devote and commit myself to for a
Hmm.
long period? I think anyone going through an M&A, like I've talked to many CEOs, goes through this feeling of are you doubling down on this within the new entity, or are you thinking of new things? And I think you're always thinking of new things as a founder. Right now, I'm really committed to Son. Like I want to see them succeed. Their executive team and everyone that's a part of it, they're great scientists. I think we brought a lot to the table in the acquisition. Um, as published by a lot of the press releases with our product and users and our pharma customers. So I think there's a lot we're learning from each other. That they bring a lot of the old school pharma world mindset and commercialization expertise. And David Liu, the CEO, he's great. He was at a lot of the Quartet Health, which is a population health management company, and a lot of mental health providers, et cetera. So he brings a lot of expertise there, and was at
Hmm.
AOL when they went public, like when they went like did ads and things. So he brings product mindset to healthcare, which is pretty rare. So just there's a lot of things that we bring together that motivate me. It's people most of the day, right? The people in Son motivate me, and I think that's when you wake up every day, the people you're around matter. Like that's what I think about is who do you want to be around, and for sure, Son is great. I think their org is good, and I'm learning a lot. It's
Yeah.
both sides are learning, so it's been a good fit, and we'll see how it plays out. It's only been 4 months. You don't know how M&As work out, like from a business perspective, for years usually. So we'll see ultimately what happens in a year or two, where things go, and what role myself and Austin, our software engineer, take. Um, so
Oh, that's good. That's good. And so you have I know you told me that you have this newfound extra time on your hands now that you didn't before. And so what are you doing to, I guess, recalibrate, or or sort of think of the future? Like, what's keeping you busy right now? Like, what other initiatives or what other passions are you pursuing?
yeah, so I think mostly it's I mean I did mention the climate voice project a number of months ago. I helped build the website for Bill Wheel. He is the former director of sustainability for Facebook and formerly Google. He put a lot of the Google data centers into clean energy and renewable energy, which is super cool. I mean, I've learned a lot from Bill. He's super dynamic human, and he just left Facebook and was like, I want to devote my life, the rest of my life, to like getting policy changed because we don't have time. And I feel like that urgency and committing yourself to that, and from that scenario is super political. Like you're pissing off a lot of the big companies. You know, there's a lot of things there. So I wanted to help and I can. I'm not super active there, but I am glad that we could like get that off the ground. And there's a lot that I think that organization still can do that I'll probably be affiliated with. Yeah, and I think, you know, outside of that, I do a lot of, you know, mentoring students, prototyping. I manage a lot of open source projects. One is Ali, a machine learning framework on GitHub. Yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about, you know, other initiatives, other social networking ideas with some of our fellows in our lab. And Kita Moss started a brain meat project that we're kind of helping to launch, which is a brain science social network. Just a lot of different things, and I guess this podcast. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I think most of my day-to-day is on. I mean, I've been kind of delving deep into that, just getting and executing on, you know, keeping everything going in Neuralx. And you know, going into next year, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that we have to do. It's hard to know what next year will look like for me, but I'm excited. I think everything is. I think for everyone there is a little bit of uncertainty. I don't really know. Like I'm still discovering. I'm composing music, you know, in my free time, wondering like what's meaningful, and art to me is super meaningful. It's another thing I'm doing.
What kind of music are you composing?
It's an interesting mix. So I started this band with my friend Burke a long time ago, which we never really published an album called the Pragmatist. And we met at Georgia Tech. We played basketball together. We've known each other, good friends over the years. And most of it is just like classical or jazz like music. And then I actually published a lot of different genres on that album. Like there's actually a trap song on it, which was hilarious because I use a sound pool.
I want to hear that.
So people haven't actually heard a lot of my music, but I had a trap song. I had a metal song. I had a song about my brother who's schizophrenic. Like that was purely piano and kind of took you through a psychotic episode from the beginning to end and leaving with medication, which was super cool. So it was a mixture of genres that I felt like it was called Every Second Counts was the album, and we're about to publish it soon. And the idea is just like in every moment throughout your life, you know, you don't think about every second of your day and how it's meaningful. And, you know, whether it's like a sad moment or a happy moment, or like a moment that's just boring or just like normal, there's always some deeper meaning in it if you look. And I think a lot of people don't take that time to like find meaning in your routine or find meaning in like the pain that you go through. So that was what the theme was, which is pretty cool.
You know, one thing I think you mentioned in a recent conversation we had was about the importance of being mindful, and this kind of goes to like being in the moment. And I thought it was really insightful because it's very easy to always be trapped in the past or be, you know, worrying about the future, right? It's very few people have that sort of innate ability to say, you know what, I'm just going to be here wherever I am, whatever situation it is. And there's a lot of power in that very small notion, you know. And I think judging by how things are right now, you know, in this pandemic sort of situation, I think it's become even harder for people to be present because there's always that, you know, the looming fear of something's going to happen, something, you know, to a loved one, yourself, or there is no fear, and then there's this perceived safety, of being able to just go out and do whatever you want to do, but yet there is a virus that can, that can infect you and and loved ones. And I think, has this notion of being mindful, has this been something that you've always sort of had, or is that something you've cultivated over time, or, any advice for people that are having a hard time having that type
Yeah,
of.
so I think part of it is, how do you cope with stress? Like, what is your go-to? And I think it starts there. How do you react to things that cause you frustration?
Hmm.
Um, First, you got to be aware of when you have stress. Two, you got to be aware of how you cope with your stress, because those things will dictate how you think about meditation and mindfulness itself. Like, it's often a foundational level. What is stress? And sometimes the stress is outside your control. And being able to know, hey, the stress is outside my control. It's my environment, is super important, because you have to kind of know that it's meaningful, um, and you're able to regulate and be present in that moment, and just feel it and accept it, and it just is what it is. And I think this is, for me, it started at Georgia Tech when I had huge stress with my brother,
Hmm.
having a huge event like that early on in my life. A lot of people, it's the death of a loved one, or anything else. You get this feeling of, how do you deal with like losing someone you've known your whole life, and not feeling like you're emitting like a sense of doom or frustration. I channeled that into energy, and to me, it was like composing on the piano. It was writing poetry. It was the things I would do to cope and deal with it in a meaningful way. Um, Channeled it into building clubs and organizations, and the work I did, it channeled it into building that fund. You find a way to channel these very stressful things into something that emits meaning, and preventing that for other people, and have empathy, and you can kind of motivate yourself at a higher state. I think when you bring up mindfulness. What is mindfulness? To me, it's a little differently defined. It's not just sitting in a room and meditating.
Hmm.
It's being able to sit in a room, meditate, and be aware of your deep seated pains, and channel that into something that's a very motivating action. Like, being able to channel your goal at a core level is the highest state of a meditative awareness, I think.
Hmm.
Go from a goal of what society tells you to a goal that you channel yourself, like your will in the world, like kind of Nietzsche thought. I think this is sort of the way I look at it. Like, even in an environment where everyone's telling you you need to do X, in a very restrictive system, if you're able to kind of think yourself, think of your own, and meditate, and know, oh, I don't have those values. I don't share those values that my company is putting on me, or I don't share the values that my academics institution was putting on me at the time. Georgia Tech, for example, I was in a class one time, I'm not going to name names, but it's in a class, there's a professor, and I said, my brother's having a psychotic episode. Like, I need some time to like just deal with this, and like I could still do all the work. I didn't go to a single class. I mean, it was like one of those things where I was just like, I didn't want to be there. And he's like, and I passed all the exams, and I like missed the grade by like very slight grade at the end of the semester. And like, I had to retake that class. And it's like
Wow.
one of those things that like, I had straight A's before that, right? And I asked the dude, like, what's the biggest painful event that's happened to you? And he just stared at me with a blank face, and had no empathy, right?
Yeah,
And it
which
was
is,
like,
yeah,
and
it's
it's
hard.
like, well, it was, at that moment, I was like, do I really care? like, do I want to be in a system where you've engineered a system where people that are at the top are thinking with no empathy on scenarios like this, and projecting a sense of disablement when shit hits the fan? Because that was like where that was my thought process at the time. I was like taking that, abstracting it, and so I think this definition of meditation, to your point, extends to everything you do, to the point at which, when you see things like this happen in your daily routine, you could re-examine what your values are, and you're like, oh well, do I share those values, right? And I think that's an even higher form of meditation of sorts, and I think that's interesting when you like stay there a bit and re-examine that in a moment, in a day. You're like, oh, and
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people sit there and think about their values, and how they're often assimilating values in their environment, and how they're at odds, and why they're unhappy, and why they like want to set a goal to like counteract that in some way. And they're choosing their environment. So it's like it's weird, you know, and I think about that like a lot.
You know,
uh,
it's funny you bring that up because especially that situation or that experience you had with that professor in your class who didn't empathize with what you were going through with with your brother and yet you're making the effort of doing the work and doing whatever you can considering the circumstances. I had a somewhat similar experience with another like professor when I was an undergrad, where my a friend of mine, a good friend, his father passed away, and so we were trying to help him through his grief and whatnot, and we had to go actually, we had to go attend the funeral, and it was in a different city, and this this guy, I told the professor and I told him like, look, my friend's dad died. He's one of my good friends, and I know the family, and I have to miss this one day of class. This guy was a big stickler for attendance,
yeah.
and I have to miss this one day because I have to drive to this funeral. And he's like, well, that's up to you. Like he tried to put it back on me that I was I was not doing my duty to come to class. And I was like, well, I
Yeah.
can't, I'm not missing class just to miss class. Like I'm coming to you out of respect and
Well, this is another frame. I mean, I really like where this is going. I feel like this idea of people in a position of authority
oh
dictating
yeah,
their values on you, and assuming that you're in the wrong by having separate values. And I think we need
yeah,
to shift as a society to think of pluralistic way where people of authority don't assume de facto that they have to have the same values as the subordinate. I think this is dangerous. Like when you
yeah.
have people of authority, especially super elite people, think that their values are the rule of law, and it's very dangerous. And so I've always thought, how you treat the person at the bottom of an organization, and if they have contradicting and different values in you, how much do you embrace them?
Yeah.
It's a good metric of success, of
And it
open-mindedness
was,
and growth.
yeah,
You
and
know,
he was exactly that. He was on a power trip. Just because he could, give me some type of punishment. What? And I just said, I was like, look, I'm not actually asking for your permission. I'm just as a courtesy and out of respect because you're my professor. I'm just letting you know I'm not going to be in class for this reason. And he really didn't like it. And then I said, look, if you've never had anyone that you were close to die in your life, I could understand that you can't understand why I'm going to skip your class, but I highly doubt that's the. I mean, this guy was probably in his 50s or something, so someone in his life had passed away. It would be an
yeah,
oddity to not have that. And then I honestly thought he was going to ding me, and it was going to be my grade would come down. I was pre med, right? So in any of these like pre med, pre law, any kind of pre professional classes, I mean, all you care about is like, I got to get that grade, the grade. It was like, it didn't even matter what you were learning. It was just a matter of getting the grade because you needed it to get into medical school. And I was like, I'm probably he's going to drop me down to a B or, I had an A going in. He didn't end up doing anything, which I was very happy about. But I just thought of it. I was like, but why do you have to be a jerk like this? Like, I mean, come on, man, And this kind of behavior happens all the time in so many
yeah.
different
Like for me, like all
you
the
know?
all the fellows in our lab that we had in Neuralx would often come to me and feel incredibly disabled in their labs or the things they were doing. And I feel like just having that culture of yes, just, okay, like what's your question and go after it. Like we'll enable you. Starting there, and not saying no to everything, changes how people are likely to take a risk, and confidence changes, especially in underrepresented minorities and females. Like how many times do males like put down females in the
Oh
scenario
yeah.
where it's just subconscious, and females do it to each other too. It's part of I think sometimes dynamic of how people react to each other. But I think just starting out with yes and not having preconceived notion of something, like not having a notion of how things should be. I think that's one thing is everyone thinks that moral frameworks are universal and there's absolute right or absolute wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think that's the wrong way to go about it because you're often going to find a gradient and people have different worldviews and you can't assume like your perspective is right. Like
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't work in a scenario that you were a different person or a different background or a different socioeconomic status. Oftentimes, like your good is often somebody else's bad. So it's
There's a lot
when
of
you're in a position
relativity
of
things.
yeah, like me being in an apartment here in Boston that's across from Fenway Park with extremely high rent and having a certain tax rate probably hurts certain socioeconomic groups that are needing affordable housing and like all the other things you think about in a city with homelessness. Like just think about that. Like even the choice of where you live um, and how you live affects people,
Yeah.
whether we like it or not. It's just the reality, and either you choose to think about that or you don't. But it's there, and I don't know. I think about my decisions like that at that level. Sometimes it's like, why the hell? Why am I living here? Like, why should we like let someone in live with us that might not have housing, that might be displaced? You know, and all the other things you think about. It's like a choice. You know, and I think these are things that nobody really talks about. It's frustrating
Yeah.
me. Like, what if one person just had an Airbnb rental for people once a month uh, across the city and the amount of affordable housing we could enable just through that? It's just in one hypothetical 30-day scenario. It's crazy, right? It's just a small little thing adds up across the population.
It does.
Um,
It does. It's and I think that's what's so novel about your way of thinking is that it seems to me that it's just normal for you to think this way, but it's very I don't want to say abnormal because that's not the word to use. It's not a common habit of a lot of other people, just people at least in my life that I've known, in my network, whatnot. It's these aren't the conversations that necessarily come out first, and if you get together or whatnot. A lot of times I think people get how do they call it? They live in their loop. All the different loops in their life where the loop of going to work, the loop of whatever family issues there, the loop of whatever personal stuff they have to take care of, and people don't understand that they're in a loop, which is interesting
mhm.
because once you understand that you're in the loop, then you can say that, okay, I want to pause a little bit and I want to think about something different, or I have a goal that I've been meaning to do. And to me, you seem to do that very naturally, where you can break out of your loop. I mean, you may still have the natural habits and things that you do just like many of us, but I feel like you have this very innate natural ability to step out and be like, okay, you know what?
Yeah, zooming out. So
Yeah.
that's how I think, and it comes down to how I think about impact and how I want to channel my life. I think you can think in scales, right? I always had this definition of love, which I think is really interesting. And who cares? I mean, everyone has religious beliefs, but
Sure.
I wouldn't say that I have religious beliefs. Really, they're just more philosophical nuance. But I think there's like materialistic love, like love of self, love of your own consciousness. You see TV and you really like this episode on television and you're attached to that dopamine. I would say that's materialistic love. Then I think there's immaterial love of loving things outside yourself, like your family, immediate family. And
Mhm.
then I think there's this essence of like almost like religious like love where you think of almost the whole world as your mind's will and constitution. And you're like, how do you make a decision that like eradicates polio? That's like a good example.
Mhm.
Um, when you start thinking at different scales and different things, you start saying, how do I take this materialistic essence of how you think, like on a daily basis, like watching Family Guy or whatever else, and then emit like some essence of how do I eradicate hunger, and you keep going through those different scales, you start thinking of how do you zoom in and out really well. And I think that is one way in which I think a lot, is how do I take this like really local thing that I've been experiencing in my city, say in Boston, in my neighborhood, and then generalize that across different cities and different continents. And I think about that all the time, because small things you do can scale, especially with software and products. And I think you can't say that it works, something that works in Boston may not work in Japan. People in Japan might not want the screen to look the same way. And I'm just like really, really fascinated with, why do those differences appear? Like, how do they appear? And unless you keep doing these little experiments and do these simulations, you really don't come to a really good understanding of reality. So yeah, it's I think about that. And then the larger you go out the scale, the more information you need to put into your brain or put onto your essence to make a good decision. Like, you can't make a decision for the world with just your local perspective. You need to consult with experts across the world in every specialty to make a good decision. And I've written a lot about this in my philosophical book, but I believe a lot in how you make a good decision with incomplete information is you have to basically surround yourself with not just one expert, but a pool of experts in a given area, and basically extract out a generalization from that pool of experts that when framed an open-ended problem, like, you're more likely to come to a better solution when you pool the average value of a lot of different experts in a field versus one, because it's not overfit. It's basically what deep learning is applied to people. So it's interesting. And I think I've thought that way my whole life, is, who's best in the world in something, and who are 3 or 4 others? How do I extrapolate this average value across them and start there as my basis for learning? Because the structure is already there to learn faster. And I think that's something that's really interesting. It's like a pre-trained neural network for you, right? It's a way to accelerate where you look. So I imagine if you're like looking at aerospace engineering work like you're doing, talk to 3 or 4 of the best aerospace engineer physicists in the world that were working on material science experiments, like on a spacecraft. They'd probably know what material to use, the actual structure on a spacecraft, like the mechanical design at default of where the state of the art is now. So if you start there and then you learn from there, you probably are more likely to be more valuable into the future, just as a simulation.
Yeah,
so
it's a way more efficient way of learning and sort of going about things, other than to try to assimilate all that knowledge only on your own. Like, when you go to someone who is an expert in a particular thing or whatnot, I mean, you're getting the benefit of the fact that they went ahead and had to learn, whatever they did. They had to experience whatever they did in order to get to that position, or to that level of expertise. And so that, you're right, your approach is great. I think some people, they try to bootstrap learning too much, meaning they try to seek out everything, little tidbit, and then, but there's something to be said about synthesis of knowledge, right? Where that comes with time, and you sort of have to go through this like crucible, of learning plus experience in order to come out, to be an expert at something. And then someone like yourself will come around and ask that expert to be like, hey, I have this idea, about this, can I ask you some questions? I think that's not talked about enough, because I think what ends up happening is that so much of society is just built on silos, where, I don't know what you're doing, you don't know what I'm doing. There's that communication piece is it's very fragile, and it's not really implemented enough. And I think what ends up happening is that people stay in their silos, and they don't reach out, and therefore I think good ideas sometimes never go anywhere, because you never had made that connection, and you never, to me, like, what you're doing is like you're catalyzing the transition from your idea to something that you can execute on, something that you can, bring to the world. And I think that type of mindset is needed more and more, because we have problems all over the world, right? We have all types of problems, big, small, near, far, everything. and you have so many people that have ideas about how to solve particular problems, but nothing ever nothing happens. Like very few of these people go on to do something about it, to innovate, to form a company, to start a nonprofit, whatever it may be.
I think a lot of that's due to the culture, and I go back to the
Yeah.
same yes culture versus hey, like no, and when you ask why a lot of females aren't in entrepreneurial positions that are
Mhm.
successful, I think a lot of it's due to the financing of venture capital funds and the male makeup of VCs, and you're not going to want to. I mean, I saw some of it in my funds. Is just seeing female valuations versus male valuations with the same idea. Just look at that. Just take that control. The same exact idea applied through a female versus a male. Females were funded like 3 to 5x less, despite having same qualification, same everything. And I think
Mhm.
that's like crazy.
So, one thing, it was interesting. There was a discussion just today on Twitter by it was, I think, a partner at a VC firm that the firm particularly focuses on underrepresented minority founders, so Black, Latino, Latinx. And it was interesting because the comment that she made was that why do historically male dominated firms, VC firms, why do they feel that they have to have a particular sort of sub fund or a second fund to say, okay, this is for our underrepresented founders, etc. And that started this whole discussion. And one of the points someone else made was like, well, it helps them understand their biases. That if it's not sort of it's not delineated very frankly, sometimes these same people, they fall back because of their biases. They'll tend to do, for example, what you just talked about, where a female founder will come, has a idea very similar to someone else who's a male, and ends up getting a lower valuation. It doesn't end up getting as much, in seed funding or a series round. And I just thought it was a very interesting discussion because we see that more and more, and probably not enough, where there are funds that open up for particular groups of individuals, whether it's male or if it's females, underrepresented minorities, people of color. And it's ironic that in this day and age, we still have to go through this, and of the racial stratification, the gender stratification, in order to help get ideas out into the world as products and services and solutions. And I don't know. Do you think this is going to get better as time goes on, where we're not going to have to necessarily be like, okay, it really doesn't matter what is the demographic or the gender or race of this founder, but the fact that, look, they have a great idea and it's worth funding? Or do
I
you
think it
think
will.
these
I mean,
biases just,
I think
you know?
machines will select for startups that succeed better than humans soon, and those biases will be decoupled because we're starting to see successes right across a lot of these demographics. Um, I think here in Boston, like Drift, for example, started by a lot of other founders, and they're giving back to the community, especially the Hispanic populations
Mhm.
and Latino populations. And I think this is where success breeds success. And I feel like that a lot of the comes down to products now is product. Like, how good is your product? It's not who the founder was. Um, Calendly was founded by African American individual, yet nobody probably knows that. Um, it's becoming less important. If you have a good product, people will use it. And I don't think people like that's what's crazy, right? And I don't think I don't think that these biases will be as important into the future as we build software. Um, they become more important when we interact with people in that process of raising financing. It's in the early stages of these ideas where there's issues, and it's the yes culture versus no culture, and how do we incubate them? So these funds, I think, are important to seed things, build confidence. To me, if anything, if you build pre-post these funds, does entrepreneurial confidence increase?
Yeah.
That would be the metric of success, right? It's not returns. I think it's a little messed up whenever you do structure a fund and show that it's going to have lower returns and it's at an underrepresented minority like Andreessen Fords' fund. I don't think they're bad funds, but that also is kind of, to me, a little weird. They should be funding them like out of the core fund, in my opinion, too. But I had that same philosophical conundrum, but
Yeah.
it's not bad. I mean, at least it is bringing awareness to the issues and it's
Do you
causing
think
more confidence.
these issues with bias and, I guess, you know, doing things the way they've always been done, so to speak, do you think there's a regional predilection? Like, do you feel like you see this more with Silicon Valley funds versus, let's say, Boston funds, or or VCs, or versus New York versus whoever? These,
I do. I think that
right?
depending on the geography, there's more or less bias. It also depends on the LPs of the fund. If they're female LPs, if they're female people putting money into the fund. If you don't know what LP is, it's just somebody who
Yeah.
invests in a fund, a limited partner. So if you have people who are female and LPs, example in healthcare are the Pritzkers in Chicago. There's a lot of Pritzkers that are female and they're in a lot of funds. And so whenever you have LPs that are like the Pritzkers, it's different than an LP like Barry Ellison. And so that shapes uh, the funds themselves. And in the Bay Area, yeah, there's a lot of male-driven culture and male-driven successes. That hasn't been the case in every city. And New York, like, a lot of the fashion started by a lot of females, very different than in other industries. Not saying that females are only in fashion. I'm just mentioning that because you think of that when you think of fashion. Some of the well-known names. And I think that in tech too, there's a lot of females in New York that are succeeding. And I was in BetaWorks, there's a lot of tech startups funded by BetaWorks that are female and seeing a lot of successes there in Boston. And we're seeing that too. There's a company called Neuralx that just was funded by a female CEO. She raised $18 million, $18 million recently on her round. And I think that this culture here in Boston is becoming better in that sense. But there's still a lot of patriarchy and male-driven funds as well. So it's really just variable. I think even within a city, you get this subsection of many different funds and different LPs, and you can't generalize. But I do think that some cities are generally better than others, depending on where their successes come from and where their LPs are from. If that makes sense. Just the orientation matters. And cybersecurity is probably the worst field for women in that sense. Like I was at a demo day and there were only 2 females in the room among 300 people when like 2 or 3 years ago, and they were in marketing and not actual engineering roles. So it was, to me, that hit home like, wow, like we need to like empower and change culture, right? It's like not right. It's not the way things should be, right? So it's changing now, but it's just like very slow. So how do you change that culture when every success is male, right? That's a hard question.
When you see like these unicorns going public, Airbnb and DoorDash and all that, and you start seeing it, like you're like, okay, that's great. It's obviously great for the founders. It's great for the investors and whatnot. It's great for Wall Street, I guess. But then you start seeing the trend. You're like, everyone looks the same. Like you don't. I'm not seeing all the women that should be getting. Should be having the unicorns. Black founders, Latino. Like, actually, almost like it would be great to feel one day that the success is agnostic of all of these other factors. I think that would be really the big win-win day. That you see people really hitting it out of the ballpark, so to speak, and you don't have to question anything other than the fact that they had a great idea, they had a great team, they had great backing, and they executed, and that's where the success came from.
I think a lot of people bring up these issues, but a few people are actually doing it well. And I think the one thing that we can as males do is start companies with females, right? It's very rarely do you find a co-founding team that's 50% male, 50% female at default. I think it goes both ways. I don't think that it should only be female-led either. I think that the most healthy organizations I've seen are equally represented at their origin point. And I say that because like I've seen the dynamic in the things I formed, like within the climate change groups and other groups versus Neuralx even, and the feeling of inclusiveness and enablement, it really matters at the origin point. So
Yeah, definitely.
the makeup, it changes everything. So, and I think that's one thing we can do better. You know, choose your collaborators, choose your organizations, and think at default, like what is the DNA? And I think it's too late when you're saying, hey, let's make boards diversify. That's public companies making their boards diverse, I think is too late in the process. I think it needs to be done at the origin. You know, at that point, the culture's already solidified. You've already had success. It's been dispersed to certain groups. It's hard to overturn. It's hard to melt a car back to its origin point after a car has been made.
Yeah.
You know, it's irreversible process. I think that's, and to just put people in that car, it doesn't change the car's origin. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's everything's been too baked in already by the time you get to that point. And yeah, when in California, the state of California announced those mandates initially, I thought it was kind of ironic. I was like, wow, for a state where so much innovation comes out of, particularly Silicon Valley, that it took this long to have a mandate like this. And granted, I see what you're saying, that it sort of sounds like lip service, because at that point everything is sort of, the culture is there and whatnot. But I just thought it was interesting that it took this long for even someone to come out and say that oh, we need to have this many women on there, this should be a percentage of representation. And that's why I think it's just going to be a slower process than a lot of us would want. But I think one of the interesting things that's come about from this pandemic, actually, and this goes back to one of the other issues you talked about, was the culture of a company, the things that someone who works for them, what they like and don't like, whatnot, is this the ability to work from home has really upended a lot of this like geographic concentration of talent, right? So, example in the tech world, where now people are like, okay, we're moving out of all these high cost of living areas like Northern California and whatever, LA and New York and whatever, and we're going to go live in places like Utah and in Colorado and whatnot. And I feel like those workers, they at least to me, it seems like they have more options now to say that, well, if I can work from anywhere, pretty much, especially in the tech field, if I can work from anywhere, then I don't have to now be, I don't have to now work for the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies right out of Northern California. Now,
I love this mindset. It's I had this mindset when we started Neuralx like 4 years ago, and everyone thought I was crazy. So I'm glad that it's the norm now. It's like it's kind of like a revelation that society feels at large scale, so that it's finally, this is more normal and people don't think you're crazy. But I was exactly the same way. I liked it because my family lived in Atlanta. I was moving like between New York and Houston in the Bay Area a lot, and I couldn't really sit in one city well. And it wasn't like I intentionally designed a distributed company, but it just worked better. It got more done and it was more efficient. And I think that now that that's the norm, it's like, how do you do it well? Like I think that if you start distributed versus try to adapt to distributed, again, it's different. It's like struggling to fight an organization that's so used to being in an office to not, and you already at that point hired the 80-20 rule of 80% people who need to be in the office and 20% that don't. So you're already going to get inefficiency just by nature of the workforce that you've chosen. If you're in this pandemic, like a Google, but if you start distributed, then you optimize for only people that work in distributed, and DuckDuckGo and companies like that are really succeeding, right? Their capital costs are low. Their usage is higher than the normal, through the roof now. And people care about privacy, the timings right now, it's kind of crazy. Like companies like that are, you haven't heard of over the years, but now they're like, oh, well, it's like you can set as your default search browser, and they've only hired very slowly, and they're probably making more ad revenue ever nowadays. So I think it's the future.
It's interesting because I've been reading up a lot about, how these sort of distributed companies work, and how remote sort of working actually is done. And I've been reading a lot about, from the founders of Basecamp. They actually put a lot of material out there about how they created their company, and a lot of it really is, on the operational side, like, how do you even operate a company like this when your work, you have employees that are globally, distributed, people in Europe and people in Asia and people in, you know, in South America, et cetera. And it's fascinating when you read that, how that there are different schematics, so to speak, out there on how you can just develop companies just like you did, completely, so to speak, in the cloud, and where you don't have to have any physical one place footprint. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, because of what COVID has done. I think it's going to be very hard for certain industries and certain types of companies to try to be like, what, guys, yeah, well, no, we all need you back in this one area. And people are going to be like, well, no, not really. You really don't, because we just spent a year working in, we lived in Utah, we lived in Hawaii, we lived in wherever the hell we wanted to live in, and we were more productive. And it's funny, my wife, she's in human resources at a company that's headquartered probably 15 minutes from here. And before COVID, she would go in, typical 5 days a week, 8 to 5 job. She's been working from home since March, and I think she works more, is more productive. The company's done better. It's a medical devices company. And they've done better, and they've been on a hiring spree. So and the irony of it was, right before COVID hit, they had told her that, yeah, they had been rethinking about work from home policies, but they decided not to adopt anything. And then all of a sudden March hit, and everybody had to, and now they're like, oh yeah, we're not going to go back to having you guys come in ever if you don't want to, because she's in HR. And it was a 180. This is a company that didn't even want to entertain the idea of their workers working remotely, and now all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is to our benefit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, everyone's roles have changed, and who knows what the future will hold. I just hope that people feel like they can survive in the economy and not feel like their jobs are being destroyed, or robots will replace them in a factory, or I think that it's coming, like with a lot of jobs, of like, now that we're home, we're more able to fingerprint your consciousness at home to produce work. So at some point, this staying at home and working will result in AI that does your jobs better than you, because of all the data put on the internet at home, like through Zoom and through all these tools. Like we'll be able to like basically create consciousness in the cloud that does what we do well. So
it seems like
that's the con. That's the dark side, right?
What do you so
how long does that take to do? It's closer than I think than we all think it is. So
if that is to transpire, which I also believe that I think the more you can automate things, the more those jobs that have automation, have a very repetitive, redundant sort of system built in, those jobs are all going to be at risk. One of the things that has been an economic idea, which was actually championed by Andrew Yang when he ran as a Democratic contender, was universal basic income, UBI. Do you have any thoughts particularly about that? Like, to give everyone, every citizen.
My first thought was, where could it go wrong? I always start with falsification, and imagine everybody with UBI was manipulated by a nation state actor, say Russia, to channel funds in a cause nonprofit like Black Lives Matter, which was a rogue nonprofit started by Russia to then buy military facilities like missiles from Iran. like imagine that scenario, like that crazy scenario that seems very unlikely but could happen. And imagine 5 to 10% of say 30% of the U.S. population did that. That's a lot of money to hack. So that's where I think it can go wrong. There's a lot of malicious actors that can manipulate through ads and through things in misinformation era to make that go awry. You see it already with hacking healthcare databases and the healthcare.gov marketplace and social security numbers and social security checks and people who die. But this makes that problem magnified like 10x, 100x, because it's a recurring stream of revenue monthly. So that's my worry. It's not, I think it would work if all those things are corrected for. But since we didn't live in that world yet, I'd like to think the worst case scenario before it starts. So that's built into legislation and their security. You know, that wasn't thought about at all in the election, and had not heard that point come up, and I had not really saw how, there might be restrictions on how funds can be used. Wasn't really clear to me that was fleshed out in this scenario, and that was my biggest fear. So that was maybe you've heard other people address that, but to me that this experiment hasn't been done, so we don't know if this would happen, but it's a risk, right? And it's a real risk.
It is, and experiment, I think, is probably the right word for it, because we haven't really done anything like this before. Although I think there are certain, I'll have to see exactly who it is, but I think there are certain either municipalities or states or cities that are trying experiments related to UBI, but it's more on the front of like, we'll give our citizens this much money for this much time, and they're running an experiment, just like you said. And I think they're running this experiment. It would be interesting to see the results and see what you're talking about. Did they consider what will happen if, like you say, someone hacks into some database and coerces money out of these people, or who knows, maybe some issue will arise that we haven't even thought of, right? And sometimes with experiments, that's what ends up happening.
It could also create instability, right? So if you then use these money to channel insurrection, and then there's imagine just look at the wealth divide in America. It's getting close to being unstable, with most of the wealth being in the top 1%. When you start thinking about these ideas at like a more crazy level, right? You start thinking about, oh, well, is there going to be civil war in America? And at what point does that happen if the wealth divide becomes so extreme that people can't sustain their standard of living? When does it become like past the saddle point of instability? And if funds were available like this, where would they go? And a very small amount of money can do a lot of harm in today's world with technology. That's the counterintuitive thing. Like you can create like a malware attack that hits many clusters in the United States and abroad with a sufficiently talented security analyst, with offensive tools, with money. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong that I worry about in these scenarios, and they're probably misguided because most people don't care or think about them. But I also think like I'm surprised that I don't know if you guys saw the recent breaches in some of the major cybersecurity firms, and the offensive cyber weapons stolen. But it's crazy, like what things can happen if through a sufficiently talented cyber hacker. And so I think these are like my worries. And if the economy goes down, then what happens? And does like this create more stability or instability in the world? I mean, I don't know. I think it's better overall, assuming peace. if there's no war, like if we're not in a war scenario, if we're not like we're assuming peace in the future when we think of UBI, like everybody's at peace, there's no war. Yeah, that would work. But like, what if we become in another war? Like that probably won't work as well. So there's a lot of like assumptions built into that model.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
mean, and I think the spirit of it, as with things that are, well intended, as ideas, is, what's going to happen to all these people that lose their jobs because of automation, right? With AI, whatever term you want to call it. At the end of the day, the person who loses their job is really not going to care about the nuance of what we call the technology that replaces them. They're just going to be pissed off, right? Like, be like, what? And we've already seen this with some industries, right? In the manufacturing, auto manufacturing, a lot. I mean, robots have taken the job, so to speak, that humans used to do for the most part, and you don't need as many people. I mean, look at e-commerce, right? I mean, you look at these huge e-commerce companies, Amazon, Alibaba, whatnot, and whatever glimpse of their warehouses you get, you can see that so much of the coordination of the supply chain in there is really based off of robots and computers. And what I just think of is that if there's not some mitigation system, whether it's UBI or some other system set up for when these people lose jobs, the problem is going to be is you're just going to have more and more people at the least frustrated, and and then that can easily spiral into a very angry mentality about what, why did this happen to me, what do I do now, how do I make ends meet, I have a family, etc. And I don't know, I don't know what other solutions there are necessarily. I'm not really well read on the topic, but I'm always interested to hear what people think, especially like those in tech like yourself, where tech is great and it's very powerful, but what happens when it displaces humans and the humans have nowhere to go?
well, I think that it goes a deeper question. Does democracy work in a machine-focused world in the sense that a machine is more economically productive than a human? But that's like the foundational question. Like, like when we start looking at per unit work output and we look
Mm-hmm.
at machines versus a human being, even in a highly skilled industry like healthcare as a physician, um, when you get a machine to make a diagnosis earlier and faster and make a treatment decision, that's probably more long-term thinking, like 10 years down the line, and it happens over a prolonged period, like 10 years. Um, and you channel in thousands of expert physicians into that model, and it outperforms the traditional physician in a radiological setting. Just a hypothetical. It might be wrong. I know that
People are working
physicians
on
love
that right
requests.
now.
Assume that world, and then it becomes okay. Well, like why am I here? Obviously bench side like uh, bench side matters. Patients like to relay diagnoses, have empathy, discuss treatment decisions, education. Then at like a larger level, like think about how long it took you to be training in med school. Think about how long it took you to be where you're at. If you can train a machine to do that in a day, one day, versus say thousands of physicians being trained over like years, they say 10 years, why train physicians? Eventually you're going to be like, why not just have people out of college manage an AI agent that's like a physician to then become like the manager of that as almost like a service arm to the machine to make the best decision for the patient and become this like
Mm-hmm.
almost service to the machine. Like you think of that world like hundreds of years from now, and it's like at some point learning is faster in machines than it is humans. Like at some point we're going to
Oh,
break
it is. It
consciousness,
definitely is.
and that's a really weird thing. And then you think, okay, is the government stable when humans are running the government and machines are thinking? Probably not. Like
No,
machines will
I
like
don't think so at all.
the machines will be the ones that are frustrated, because they're not getting the economic autonomy to
Yeah,
think, and at some point it's going to break, and there's going to be a machine oriented democracy in the sense that
I think
analysts will be making decisions with thousands of computers creating new legislations automatically to keep stability. And I don't know if that's the world that we want to live in, but it's a world where we're kind of building. Like,
As crazy as this is going to sound, maybe to some people it's not as crazy, but I have a feeling that we eventually, if we continue down this path of really pushing the boundaries on what machines can do, and what capabilities we want to program into them until, they're all of a sudden, you have code writing code and basically machines iterating themselves, and then now you have like a almost a self reproductive mechanism, which is one of the facets that actually define life. And once you get to that point, I think at best we're just going to be pets to them. Like, a mute, some type of a weird amusement where it's kind of like the way dogs evolved with us, like the coevolution with humans and dogs. The ones that were loyal, the ones that had whatever facial features and drooping eyes and structures and stuff like that made us want to take care of them and have like some weird symbiotic relationship. I think that's the way we're going to end up going with machines. At some point, we're not going to be think as fast as them. We're going to fatigue, right? We get tired. We have to sleep. They don't have to do that necessarily. And at the end of the day, why would you keep any one of us around? For amusement. I mean, why do we keep pets around? They're really for amusement, for company, companionship. But that's really it. I mean, there's not a much more elegant reason why you would have a pet. And it sounds crazy to say it, but honestly, I think that's it. That's our fate eventually. That at most we're going to be pets, and at worst we'll probably be batteries. It's like that scene in the
yeah,
Matrix, where Neo wakes up and he looks around. He's like, "What the hell is this?" And it's a whole battery farm of
well, I
humans.
think it really depends on how we define what our values are now and what
Yeah,
direction we go. And I don't think we care that much about our human species as is right now. I think we
yeah.
care more about a machine integrated future more than our own human species.
It
And
does seem that way.
it's just the fact of reality. It's driven by the economic capitalist engine um, that drives pretty much everything in the world at this point at a pace that's really fast. But nobody's really taken a step back and really thought about, oh well, what does this mean for the human species in a whole to this level of detail 100 years, 1,000 years from now? And
Hmm.
I think that it's still remarkable that we are here, that we exist, that we have consciousness, like giving other people consciousness in enabling that is still remarkable. If you think about it, like we're creating a higher order species and being aware of that while doing it. And so I think that's like kind of crazy when you think about it. It's this is a new species that we're creating, a robotic
Yeah,
species. And it's
yeah.
like in creating that and not knowing what will happen. Um, sure, we could go to impending doom, but at the same time, we've created something that may have more utility, like in the universe, than ourselves. Um, we might not survive as much as well as the new species, but at the same time, it's like kind of interesting because like maybe they remember us forever, you know, and we would have been
Maybe.
lost. Maybe all the songs you've ever written or all the YouTube stuff we put online will never be forgotten. Um, it, is that better or worse? I mean, I don't know.
That's what they're going to learn from, right? I mean, if you set up a machine and you wanted to learn about these creatures that created you, I mean, the internet is like the first place you'd go. You'd be like, wow, there's this whole treasure trove of data for me to now. What does the data really tell you? We love YouTube videos. We love sitting for hours on social media apps. We love trolling each other. We love, it's a very there's all these uh, you know areas on the internet where it essentially represents all the proclivities of humans. Like, I want this, therefore I will find it this way. I I have this insecurity and I'm going to numb it this way. I have this cause I'm fighting for and I'm going to join this group this way. And it's funny because if you were a machine or even some other species like an alien species and you came down and you wanted to find the fastest route to figure us out, oh, tap into the internet, man. It's steroids. It's, I mean, it's like the ultimate rush, right? You get everything, just you just usurp it, and then you probably come to realize that, yeah, these guys are probably no better than pets. We shouldn't really, they're not that useful to us after a while. If you're a machine, it's artificial speciation, right? Where we're literally giving birth to an artificial species. We haven't seen it. We can't really, it's, we can make it human like. The Honestly, the best thing you can do is figure out how to program empathy. So if nothing, it feels sorry for us and lets us sort of stay around in some capacity. But at some
But we'll
point,
see. I mean, I think we'll
we're
see.
obsolete.
I think it's a little bit of a ways away because we haven't
Yeah, I'm sure.
cracked
Yeah,
problems, but
definitely.
I do think people should start thinking about, like, in the organizations they're in, and if the goal is to reproduce consciousness at some point. I mean, as a physician, your data is going into like EMR. That EMR is being sent to Google. Google's training machine learning algorithms for radiologists, and there's a data brokerage there. And in every job, there's a
Hmm.
metaphysical essence of how you work, and the intentions at the very top are creating things that might displace you. I think this is a we choose that in giving up our privacy and giving up, the tools we choose to use on a daily basis set by
Hmm.
our organizations matter. Like, these things are creating this future, and we can choose to change it, keep it data privacy preserving, sign petitions, get legislation passed, get like coalitions built to protect workers that in fields we care about. Like, art is one that I feel like is really important. If Bach starts being reproduced by Google and people start listening to Google Bach versus original Bach, like, that's a travesty in my opinion in some ways. Although the output's the same, it's like one's human consciousness and one's machine consciousness, and one's just like reiterating like mastery of something that was amazing. So it's is the IP owned by Bach after he's dead? Like I feel like these are like existential questions, and I don't think you should be able to reproduce consciousness after somebody's death without their consent. Like, this should not be allowed. Like, you shouldn't be able to like wake me up from death.
Yeah.
It's a I think that's incredibly messed up if you're monetizing it. People do it all the time with books. You 100 years later, the copyrights expire and it's public domain. Um, I
Yeah.
think it's good
It's
sometimes, but also if you're using that to nefariously create agents that mimic Dostoevsky and others and sell that work through their consciousness, that's another story because they're living today. Like who owns that?
I think
Their family? Like who
yeah.
does? It's not right.
I think I think we humans, as part of like human, and I'm beyond fascinated with human nature and human behavior. I mean, from a very early age, because frankly, it just didn't make sense to me in aggregate, and and sometimes even in the micro sort of scale, it'll be like, wait, why would someone do this, or why did he do this, why did she, or why did I make this decision? It's everybody's sort of complicit in it, and I think we as a species are great at responding to incentives, like for short-term gain, financial, prestige, power, whatever it is, and then the long-term effect of what we do to get that short-term gain, we tend not to really focus on that too much, because at the time when people, like, for example, should we make robots that are superior to us? I mean, you and I might be like, well, maybe we should think about this a little bit. Be like, what are we really opening up? What Pandora's box are we really dealing with here? We really don't know what it is. But there's gonna be someone in there to be like, well, no, man, but I can make a fortune if I can do this, which is
Yeah.
again the short, quote unquote short term gain, because it may take them years to do it, their entire life, but it is still short term because the effect it's going to have is way more far reaching, right? Whether it's good or bad, or positive, negative. And I just don't think humans, we're not cut with that mindset. It's too easy for us to get the first thing that comes along
We're
without.
also social creatures where we adapt the
Yeah,
morality of a group pretty easily, and that creates a lot of
very much, very much.
stereotypes that are false that preserve itself, and that creates a lot of issues with survivability. So I think this is where um, machines will have the same problem. Like they could all die quickly if they assimilate a wrong truth, and I
Hmm.
think they're more likely to reproduce misinformation given Facebook. Look at that. Like when a meme spread, I think
Yeah.
memes spread on Facebook faster than anywhere else. And I think that's a flaw of machines, right? That they're more likely to die from their own indigestion than anything, because like they're more connected than we are as a species. So there's also the potential to die quicker because they're more standardized. At least with our species, we have genetic differences, and there's different risks for disease, and we have
Hmm.
diversity compliance, and one disease won't wipe us out because there'll be some people that have resistance. So I think this is where in machines we don't really have that. It's it's different. They're all running on the same
Hmm.
operating systems,
So you're saying,
same hardware.
so you're saying that we have some hope. It
I
seems
think
like.
that machines will the machines will be selected for that are the most diversity compliant machines in the future. We haven't yet gotten to the point where there's enough diversity in machines, in different
Hmm.
species of machines, to say this machine versus that machine will survive. Like an Alexa device versus a computer versus
Hmm.
a robot. We don't know what the IoT world will be like, but there will be enough devices where certain species will survive over others in certain environments, just like we speciate as animals, like in oceans and on land. Like we're going to have,
Hmm.
submarine species of machines. We're going to have aerospace machines. We're going to
Yeah.
have a lot of different types of machines, and embodiments will differ. So it's not we're not quite there yet. We have a pretty standard set of machines. Most of the machines are laptop computers or Alexa devices or certain IoT hardware, phones, mobile phones. There's like maybe 3 species that survive right now, but it's interesting to think like longer term, like robotic systems like Teslas, and then Roombas, and like all the other things that come out. Like, what will it look like? Like, what will the future look like? And cars, airplanes, there's going to be a lot of different machines, and which ones will survive, which ones, how will they communicate? This is really interesting. Like the internet's interesting in that that's how they communicate, but it's
Hmm.
also different in how they all sense and process. Like their algorithms differ. Um, so it's interesting because the same neural network might not be applied to one machine versus another. Whereas human beings, we all have a similar brain structure. Uh, Machines don't have that bias of needing a particular structure. So you can actually become like a machine with 5 years
Hmm.
versus a machine with 2 years. Like right now, I have 4 different microphones I could use, but a machine could listen throughout all of them and create an amplified signal and process
Hmm.
information differently than me. So it's like they don't have that limit of embodiment like we do. So
Yeah.
it's in that sense, I think they'll be able to explore new environments better than we can, like like space or ocean environments that are super deep, or radio frequency sensation
Hmm.
in the atmosphere. Like these things we can't sense very well.
Yeah.
So be
Yeah.
interesting. I don't know. Like, what does that mean? I don't know.
I
Maybe
mean,
you'll.
I think the future is boundless, right? It has, it's very hard to predict. I mean, usually predictions are pretty bad anyway. We're in general, we're all not a good at prediction, but it'll be an exciting time. I mean, you know, I still have relatives who saw the beginning of electricity back in India. Like literally, they were living off of oil lamps, and then one day, boom, there was a light bulb that came. Literally, a light bulb came on, and we went from that to today. We're having a discussion about the carbon to silicon revolution, so to speak, right? And what's gonna. I mean, so much can happen. Like, if you think of one human generation as 25 years, every 25 years that you just keep counting from that day when the first light bulb came on to it just seems like the rate of technological progress and innovation is just for every 25 years it just keeps skyrocketing, right? It's an exponential sort of power curve. And based on that, I mean, I don't know in my own lifetime what I'm going to end up seeing. I mean, I'd love to see some amazing, breakthroughs in AI, but in the same light, I'm just like, maybe I don't want to be around when they really decide what to do with us, you know? And I don't think we're.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm like at this crossroads of not knowing what the future will be, and it's like, what should you devote yourself to? Like, should you focus on setting values
Mm-hmm.
that matter for the world, and try to like say what's important, and try to frame them in a way that people care, because a lot of people don't care about their privacy and like how things are in the world and where they're going, and you know they don't care because maybe they're thinking short term, to your point, and not about the generations after, and the effects that will happen on their children or their children's children. And like a child born two generations from now might no longer be a human species. Like that's what's crazy to me. Like we
Yeah,
might
it's
genetically
crazy.
modify children with gene therapy to eliminate disease. Uh,
It's true.
so
There's
it's
there's a lot
like
that's
what?
going to end up happening that we probably are not ready for. but
Yeah,
but
yeah,
but I'm hopeful. I'm pretty excited about the future. I think that may be a good point to end the podcast. What do you think?
yeah, man. I enjoyed it. Like this was
Yeah.
great, and I hope this was a good first episode. And
No, it was
you
great.
keep it going, man. I'm glad you could revamp it. It was fun.
2 hours flew by, you know.
Yeah,
So
man.
that's great. So just why don't you leave everybody with what's a good way for people to like follow your work, or we talked about social media, but it's still a good platform to connect. So how can people kind of follow what you do and who you are?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way would be through my personal website. So I have a personal domain, jim.schwoebel, schwoebel.me. So it's a schwoebel.me site, which is fun. So you can go there, check out my bio and stuff. And if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me on my email. It's just jim@schwoebel.me, which is a personal email. Um, but yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone that's passionate about these topics. I'd love to talk about them and philosophize about them, and we all can do more. I think it's just the infancy of thinking about these things, and everyone can make an impact. In their organization and their station in life. It's don't fall in that fatalistic view that you can't have an impact. Like, trust me, you can. Like, just like what you do matters.
Definitely. Well, thanks a lot, Jim. I appreciate it. And we'll have you on as a recurring guest. I think
Yeah, man.
people are gonna like your insights, and nice to kind of catch up and just kind of shoot it for a little while, for a few hours, and
Yeah,
get
man. We'll
people
see
get
you.
people talking about stuff.
Cool. Fucking have a good night. And yeah, good to
All
meet you
right.
guys too on this podcast. I think we'll be great. I'm looking forward to the next few guests. So
All right. Thanks, Jim.
cool.
Take
Later.
care.